HOA took my land for a parking lot, but they didn't know. They fell into my trap. I never thought I'd have to fight for something that was already mine. But that's exactly what happened when I discovered that Richard Lawson, the smug and power-hungry HOA president of Sunny Pines, had stolen my land right from under me. I was living in the city, grinding through 60-hour work weeks, when I got the call from Mr. Harrison, my grandfather's longtime neighbor. His voice was tight with anger. "They're turning your land into a damn parking lot, kid. You better get down here before it's too late." At first, I thought he was exaggerating. A parking lot? On my grandfather's land? No way. But as I sped down the familiar roads leading back to Meadow Creek, a sick feeling churned in my gut. I pulled onto the dirt path leading to the farm, and the sight before me knocked the breath from my lungs. The land was unrecognizable. What had once been sprawling fields, land my grandfather had nurtured for generations, was now a massive asphalt monstrosity, lined with bright white parking spaces. Signs reading Sunny Pines HOA, resident parking only, were planted all over my property. A few luxury SUVs and sports cars were already parked, as if this place had never been anything but a cash-grabbing parking business. And standing in the middle of it all, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a self-appointed king, was Richard Lawson. I stormed up to him, barely restraining my fury. What the hell is going on here? He barely glanced at me before returning to his phone call. Disrespect oozed from the guy. When he finally did look at me, it was with bored amusement, like I was a lost tourist in his domain. "We're optimizing community resources," he said smoothly. "You're welcome to apply for a parking permit." A parking permit. For my own damn land. I felt my hands clench into fists. "This land belongs to me. It belonged to my grandfather before me. You had no right to touch it." Lawson sighed, like I was some annoying fly buzzing in his ear. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." He flipped through his clipboard, pretending to check something. "This land was designated as a community lot years ago. It's all in the records. If you have an issue, feel free to take it up with the county." He knew exactly what he was doing, and so did I. They had stolen my land, and they thought they'd get away with it. They had no idea who they were messing with. Richard Lawson thought he could brush me off. He thought I was just some clueless outsider, too detached from Meadow Creek to fight back. He was dead wrong. I wasn't going to walk away while that smug bastard turned my grandfather's land into a HOA money printing machine. If they thought they could steamroll over me, they were about to hit a brick wall. Digging for the truth, I stormed back to the farmhouse, slamming the door behind me. The house had been empty since my grandfather passed, yet his presence still lingered, his old boots by the door, his dusty coffee mug still sitting on the kitchen table. He would have never let this happen. Mr. Harrison was already there, waiting for me on the porch. He handed me a glass of iced tea, but his face was hard, eyes burning with the same anger I felt. "They started paving 3 weeks ago," he said. "Didn't even post notices. Just showed up one morning with bulldozers like they owned the damn place." My jaw tightened. "Did my grandfather ever mention selling the land?" I asked. Mr. Harrison scoffed. "Joe? Sell this land? Hell no. He used to say he'd rather set fire to it first." I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. If my grandfather never sold the land, then how the hell did the HOA get permission to take it? There was only one place to get answers: the county records office. I drove straight to the county office, my heart pounding the whole way. I had a bad feeling about this, one of those instincts that sank deep into your gut, like lead. The records clerk, a thin woman with glasses perched at the tip of her nose, barely looked up when I approached her desk. "I need to see property records for a parcel outside of Meadow Creek," I said. She sighed, already annoyed. "Great. Bureaucracy at its finest. Name on the deed, Joe Miller. The land should have passed to me, Alex Morgan, last year." She typed for a minute, squinting at her screen. Then her fingers froze. Her expression flickered just for a second before she schooled her face into neutrality. "According to our records," she said carefully, "that land was converted to a community-owned lot in 2015. My pulse spiked. "That's impossible," I snapped. "My grandfather would have never agreed to that." "Well, someone did." She turned her screen toward me. There it was, a scanned document, dated July 8, 2015, with my grandfather's signature at the bottom, granting an easement for public use. The only problem? That wasn't his signature. I knew my grandfather's handwriting like the back of my hand. He had an old-school way of writing, careful and neat, every letter perfectly legible. The signature on the screen? It was sloppy, rushed a complete forgery. "Who authorized this?" I demanded. The clerk shrugged. Indifferent. The county commissioner's office signed off on it. You'll have to take it up with them. I gritted my teeth. More red tape, more corruption, but now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. HOA didn't just take my land. They falsified documents to make it look legal. And I was going to burn them to the ground for it. I needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence that the HOA had committed fraud. And I knew just the person who could help me get it, Linda Fisher. Linda had been the treasurer of the Sunny Pines HOA for years. She was sharp, detail-oriented, and most importantly, she hated Richard Lawson's guts. I found her at a small cafe on the edge of town, nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she smirked. "Alex Morgan," she drawled. "The prodigal grandson returns. What can I do for you?" I slid into the seat across from her. "I need to know what's really going on with my land." She arched an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous question." I leaned forward. "I think Richard forged my grandfather's signature, and I think he's been using my land to scam the homeowners." Linda studied me for a moment. Then, with a small sigh, she pulled a flash drive from her purse and slid it across the table. "You didn't hear this from me," she said. Back at the farmhouse, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, heart hammering. Files popped up: spreadsheets, emails, financial records, and buried among them was exactly what I needed. July 2015, HOA internal email. "The old man won't sell, but we don't need him to. Just file the paperwork with the county. I'll take care of the rest." Richard Lawson 2015 property transfer request. Signed by Richard Lawson, authorization granted to convert parcel 143B into a community lot. Ownership transferred to Sunny Pines HOA. Bank statement. HOA account parking revenue deposits, $50,000 plus per month. They had been making tens of thousands of dollars a month off my land. They forged the documents. They took over my land. And then they monetized it, charging residents for a parking permit on property they never legally owned. I sat back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just a case of property fraud. This was a multi-million-dollar scam, and Richard Lawson was about to pay for every cent of it. Richard Lawson had built his little parking lot empire on my land, using nothing but lies, forged documents, and the blind trust of the Sunny Pines HOA. Now, I had the proof to burn it all to the ground, but if I was going to take him down, I couldn't just rush in swinging. This had to be strategic. I needed to play the game smarter than him, and I needed allies, because once I made my move, there would be no going back. The first thing I did was drive straight to the office of Victoria Clark, the best damn property lawyer in Meadow Creek. She was tough, sharp as a blade, and had a reputation for making corrupt HOA boards cry in court. She barely looked up when I entered her office, typing furiously on her laptop. "You're the guy fighting the Sunny Pines HOA, right?" I raised an eyebrow. Word traveled fast. "I'm the guy they stole land from," I corrected, "and I want it back." She gestured for me to sit. "Tell me everything." So I did. I laid out every detail: the forged property transfer, the fraudulent parking revenue, the bribes to county officials. I showed her the emails, the spreadsheets, the smoking gun that proved Richard had planned this for years. Victoria leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her desk. "They're screwed." "So we can take them to court?" I asked. She snorted. "Oh, we can do more than that." Within 2 hours, Victoria had drafted an emergency injunction to freeze all HOA financial transactions related to the parking lot. That meant no more permit fees, no more monthly parking charges, no more profit for Richard Lawson. I couldn't destroy the HOA just yet, but I could cut off its legs and watch it stumble. Now, I needed to turn the homeowners against him. Because Richard didn't just steal from me, he was robbing them too. And I had just the person to help me expose it. David Carter, an investigative journalist for the Meadow Creek Gazette. He had a reputation for digging up dirt on corrupt officials, and I knew that if I gave him the right information, he'd make sure every homeowner in Sunny Pines knew exactly who was stealing from them. When I met him at a coffee shop downtown, I slid a thick folder across the table. "What's this?" he asked, flipping it open. "A front-page scandal," I said. "Sunny Pines HOA has been running a fraudulent parking scheme for years, making thousands off a stolen property, and I have proof." David's eyes gleamed with interest as he skimmed the documents. "This is a hell of a story. I need it published ASAP," I said. "I want every homeowner in that neighborhood to know exactly how deep Richard Lawson's corruption runs." David grinned. "Oh, don't worry. By tomorrow morning, He'll be Meadow Creek's most hated man. That night, I did something bold. I printed 200 flyers and stuck them on every mailbox, every car windshield, and every front door in Sunny Pines. Community meeting. Your home may be at risk. Sunny Pines HOA has been profiting off stolen land. Your money is being funneled into fraudulent projects. Come to the community center tomorrow at 7 p.m. to hear the truth. By morning, the Meadow Creek Gazette had published a full expose on the scandal, and Richard Lawson's face was plastered all over the front page. Sunny Pines HOA, accused of fraudulent land grab. Millions stolen in fake parking scheme. I knew that Richard had seen the article because, by noon, his lawyers were calling Victoria, trying to negotiate. But I wasn't interested in negotiations. I wanted blood. The community center was packed. Homeowners filled every seat, their faces a mix of confusion, anger, and suspicion. They had questions, and I had answers. Richard sat at the front of the room, looking pale but furious, flanked by his cronies. His wife sat beside him, whispering something in his ear, her lips pressed in a tight line. I stepped onto the small stage, holding up the original land deed. "This is my grandfather's land," I began. "It was never for sale, never signed away, never meant to be a parking lot for anyone but my family." A murmur rippled through the crowd. And yet, Sunny Pines HOA claimed it as their own. They forged documents, bribed county officials, and have been charging you to park on land they never legally owned. Gasps, shocked whispers. A few people turned to glare at Richard. For the last 5 years, Richard Lawson has been pocketing money from your parking fees, not for the community, not for improvements, but for himself. I held up the bank statements, the fraudulent signatures, the HOA emails discussing the scam. Every single one of you has been stolen from. Richard shot to his feet. "This is bullshit," he snapped. "None of this is true. This man is just bitter that his grandfather sold the land." I smirked. "Funny you say that, because I have a sworn affidavit from the county records office confirming that the sale never happened. And I have a court-ordered injunction freezing all HOA accounts related to the parking lot." Silence. Richard's face drained of color. He turned to the HOA board members beside him, but they were already backing away. "You," he started. "You can't do this." I took a step closer, my voice cold. "I already did." The room erupted, homeowners shouting questions, demanding resignations, turning on Richard and his board. He had lost them. I watched him squirm, reveling in the way his power crumbled in real time. This was the beginning of his downfall, and I wasn't done yet. Richard Lawson had just been publicly humiliated. In front of the entire neighborhood, he had been exposed as a fraud, a liar, a thief. His golden parking scheme built on my stolen land was now crumbling. But men like Richard, they don't go down quietly. If I thought he would just admit defeat and walk away, I was dead wrong. He still had connections. He still had power. And now, he had nothing to lose, which made him dangerous. The morning after the meeting, I woke up to an official-looking envelope taped to my farmhouse door. I ripped it open, already knowing it wouldn't be good. "Cease and desist notice. From Sunny Pines HOA Legal Department to Alex Morgan. You are hereby ordered to withdraw all legal claims against the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association. Failure to comply will result in legal action for defamation, trespassing, and financial damages." I laughed, loudly. Defamation? For exposing the truth? Trespassing? On my own damn land? Financial damages? For the money he stole? This wasn't a real legal threat. This was desperation. Richard was scrambling, throwing everything he had in my direction, hoping something would stick. It wasn't going to work. But he wasn't done yet. Later that afternoon, I drove into town for supplies. When I came back, I nearly slammed into a massive metal gate, chained shut, right at the entrance to my property. A bright red sign hung on it. Private property, no trespassing, Sunny Pines HOA restricted area. My own land. Richard had locked me out of my own goddamn land. I barely had time to process that before a security truck rolled up. 2 men in cheap polo shirts with Sunny Pines security, stitched onto their pockets, stepped out, crossing their arms like they were intimidating. "Afternoon," one of them said, voice dripping with fake politeness. "You're parked in a restricted zone. This is my property." Actually, the second guy smirked. "HOA regulations prohibit non-residents from using community access points. If you don't have a permit, you need to move along." I gritted my teeth. "Show me the regulation that says I need a permit for land I own." The first guy shrugged. "That's an HOA matter. This was so much worse than a fake lawsuit. Richard wasn't just trying to intimidate me. He was trying to choke me out. He wanted to cut off my access to the land, make life so unbearable that I'd give up and sell. He was making his move. It was time for me to make mine. Richard wanted to play dirty. Fine. He was about to learn that I could play dirtier. First, I called Victoria Clark, my lawyer, and explained the situation. She sighed. Richard Lawson is a special kind of idiot. Can we get the gate removed? Legally? Yes, but we don't have to wait for that. If the HOA put up a gate blocking you from your land, they're in violation of multiple property laws. We can file an emergency injunction. First thing in the morning. I smirked. Actually, I have a better idea. The bulldozer plan by nightfall. I was back at the gate, but I wasn't alone. I had Mr. Harrison, my grandfather's old friend. I had 3 guys from town who hated the HOA just as much as I did, and I had a goddamn bulldozer. Mr. Harrison adjusted his cap, grinning. This thing's got enough horsepower to tear through a bank vault. We don't need a vault, I said. Just a really inconvenient gate. I climbed into the driver's seat. Richard had no problem bulldozing over my rights. Now, I was bulldozing over his gate. The machine roared to life, and with one slow, deliberate push of the controls, the gate buckled like tin foil. The chains snapped, metal screeching as the entire barricade collapsed into a useless heap. I threw the machine into reverse, hopping down from the cab just as headlights appeared in the distance. Richard Lawson's SUV. Perfect. He pulled up fast, practically flying out of the driver's seat, face red with rage. What the hell do you think YOURE doing? I dusted off my hands. Just reclaiming my property, Richard. His eyes bulged. You vandalized HOA property. That's a criminal offense. I grinned. Oh, so now it's my land? He froze. I took a step closer, voice calm, lethal. You blocked me out of my own property. That's illegal. You tried to intimidate me with fake lawsuits. That's harassment. You stole from homeowners, forged documents, and used county officials to cover your tracks. That's fraud. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, trying to come up with a response. You're making a mistake, he finally spat. I smiled. No, Richard, I'm fixing yours. I turned to Mr. Harrison and the other guys, gesturing to the rubble. We're done here. Let's clean up this mess. Richard stood there, completely powerless, watching as we cleared his last attempt at control. He knew he had lost this battle, which meant he'd try to win the next one. And that was fine, because I'd already set the final trap. Richard Lawson was backed into a corner, and men like him don't go down without throwing one last desperate punch. But what he didn't realize, I had already set the perfect trap. I knew he was going to fight dirty. I knew he was going to pull every string he had left to try and win this war. I just needed to wait. And when he finally made his move, I'd be ready. After I bulldozed through Richard's illegal gate, he vanished for a few days. No phone calls, no threats, nothing. That only meant one thing. He was planning something. And then the announcement came. Urgent HOA meeting, mandatory attendance topic, HOA future, and community improvements. It was scheduled for Friday night at the same community center where I had humiliated Richard in front of the entire neighborhood. I could already tell what this was. This was his last attempt to regain control, to spin the story, to gaslight the homeowners, to turn the tables on me. Too bad for him. I had already rigged the deck. Richard's desperate play. I walked into that meeting like I owned the damn place. Because, technically, I did. Every chair was filled, every homeowner tense with anticipation. Some looked confused, some angry, but the moment I stepped in, all eyes were on me. Richard stood at the front of the room, flanked by his last remaining board members. His wife sat stiffly in the front row, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The second I sat down, he cleared his throat and launched into his speech. I called this meeting because, as a community, we are facing a serious problem. In recent weeks, an individual has engaged in illegal activities that threaten the stability of our neighborhood. I smirked. Here it comes. He has spread false information, destroyed HOA property, and attempted to turn neighbor against neighbor, all for his own personal gain. He turned, glaring directly at me. Alex Morgan has made it his mission to dismantle everything we've built. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded, buying into his bullshit. Others looked skeptical. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just let him dig his own grave. I will be proposing new HOA policies tonight, he continued. Policies that will prevent this kind of disruption from ever happening again. And there it was. This wasn't just about saving himself. He wanted to rewrite the rules, change the HOA policies so he could legally shut me down. Too bad for him. He had already lost. The kill shot, I leaned forward, slow and deliberate. Before you start voting on your little dictatorship plan, Richard, the first said, voice carrying through the room. I have something to share. I pulled out a thick manila folder and held it up. Inside were copies of every single piece of evidence I had collected. The forged land transfer, the bank statements showing the stolen parking revenue, the emails confirming the bribes to county officials. And then I turned to the back of the room. I'd like to introduce a guest tonight. The doors swung open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. A sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. Richard's face drained of color. The lead officer held up a warrant. Richard Lawson, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying legal documents. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. Richard froze. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then, without warning, he bolted. Big mistake. The officers tackled him before he made it 3 steps. His wife? She just sat there, staring at the floor, saying nothing. The homeowners? They watched in shock as their once powerful HOA president was dragged out in handcuffs. And me? I just leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, and watched justice do its work. The aftermath after that night, everything changed. The HOA was dismantled. The fraudulent parking lot was permanently shut down. The stolen funds, they were seized and redistributed back to the homeowners. But the best part? I got my land back. Completely. Officially. Mine. And just to make sure no HOA would ever touch it again, I had it rezoned as agricultural land only, meaning no development, no commercial use, nothing but open space, just like my grandfather wanted. As for the homeowners, with Richard gone, they finally saw the truth. Some of them even apologized. Some of them asked me to stay. And you know what? I did. I rebuilt the farmhouse. I reconnected with the land. I turned part of it into a community garden, open to anyone who wanted fresh produce. And every time I saw Richard's old house, sitting empty and abandoned, I smiled, because he thought he could steal from me. But in the end, I took everything from him instead.